UNOVIS to Bauhaus, Malevich's theory of education. One way to connect UNOVIS and the Bauhaus is by looking at Casimir Malevich's theory of education. In this short presentation I'm going to outline a way to do that. To begin, I will show familiar images, mainly taken from archival photographs, which you will probably recognize. However, towards the end, when I'm actually talking about Malevich's theory of education, I will show images of this painting. It's called Supremus number 57. Malevich painted it in 1916. We are lucky to have it permanently here in London, and I have been able to visit it and to take pictures of it on my iPhone. Malevich only ever left Russia once, in 1927, when he visited Germany. He spent most of his time in Berlin, but he did go to Dessau where he visited the Bauhaus. This is a picture of him at the Bauhaus. He is looking out of a large, floor-to-ceiling height window. You can recognize the gridded glass volume of the workshop teaching block on his right. One important feature of Malevich's visit to Berlin was the translation and publication of his book called The Non-Objective World, the Manifesto of Suprematism. The book consists of 2 essays. The first is entitled Introduction to the Theory of the Additional Element, and it is here that Malevich set out his theory of education. Malevich's teaching activities began in the post-revolutionary period in Russia. In 1919, during the Civil War, he was invited to teach in the art school in Vitebsk. Malevich spent little more than 2 years in Vitebsk and he returned to St. Petersburg in 1922. At the end of the Civil War, we know that Malevich's presence in Vitebsk played a key role in the formation of the UNOVIS group, where he acted as a kind of catalyst, exciting the young teachers and students at the school. While he was in Vitebsk, Malevich stopped painting and took up writing, producing what he termed brochures. Through his writing, Malevich was able to explore the new system of painting, which he had developed in the pre-revolutionary years, around 1915, famously known as suprematism. You can see a sequence of Malevich's suprematist paintings in this photograph, and here is a photograph of some paintings made by his UNOVIS students. The connection to suprematism is obvious to begin to understand Malevich's approach to painting and education. It helps to know a little about his intellectual background. He was influenced by the mainstream of Russian philosophy and literary writing of the late 19th and early 20th century, which was in turn influenced by the thinking of the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation was translated into Russian in 1884. Where it was taken up by philosophers and writers such as Leo Tolstoy, Vladimir Solovyov and Nikolai Fedorov. Schopenhauer's outlook was somewhat gloomy. He saw life as an unfortunate consequence of a self-generating and simultaneously self-destructive process he called will. For Schopenhauer, the human capacity to think and to reason is entirely subordinate to the purposeless activity of the will, as are all those higher values we tend to associate with reason. But Schopenhauer's Russian followers, although they accepted the anti-nostalgic basis of his metaphysics, refused to accept his gloomy outlook, especially his attitude towards reason. Instead, they turned to a much older, pre-Enlightenment, indeed pre-Christian, understanding of reason, which claimed that reason is not cold, calculating and mathematical but hot and on fire. Reason burns with a passionate desire for unification with the truth. In other words, reason is erotic. Suprematism, like Schopenhauer's philosophy, was materialist and anti-nostalgic, but, unlike Schopenhauer and in line with the Russian philosophers and writers whose names I have mentioned, Malevich was not nihilistic. At the core of suprematism is an erotic drive to keep art alive. Malevich asked how, given that artworks are material, can art be immunized from the inevitable dissolution and decomposition that comes with material process? He realized the only thing that can survive the dissolution and decomposition of material process is the image of that process, and that is what he tried to demonstrate with his suprematist system of paintings. The colored suprematist shapes are the dissolved and decomposed images of traditional painting. The black square is the dissolved and decomposed image of the colored suprematist paintings, and the white square is the image of the black square, dissolved and decomposed as a supplement to suprematism and acted out through his writing and teaching. Malevich tried to formulate a dialectics of failure in his writing. Malevich points out how all human projects, by the very nature of what they are destined to fail. This is simply because their protagonists die. They run out of time before completing the project. As one generation passes away, so the next generation inherits its projects, but the next generation forgets the original purpose of those projects, eventually abandoning them or transforming them into something different. Malevich didn't see the inevitable failure of projects as a shortcoming, quite to the contrary. He saw it as a horizon of infinite possibility. But he was aware infinity thought through failure is not something that everybody can accept. Scientists, engineers, economists, and most so-called ordinary people cannot accept the horizon of failure. However, artists, and I think we can include architects in this category, can. This is because artists already know, from their own concrete experience of what it is actually like to make work, of the impossibility of achieving a perfect fit between an intention, for example a proposal for a building, and its material manifestation. In his essay on the introduction to the additional element, Malevich used a biological analogy to explain how the mechanism of imperfection could work to the benefit of art practice. He likened art to an organic body and the various art styles to bacteriological infections, but he also cast the analogy in a different way, arguing that just as a bacillus modifies the human body, so novel visual elements, introduced into the world by technological and social changes, modify the sensibility and nervous system of the artist. Malevich didn't want artists, or indeed architects, to cure their techno-sociological infections. To the contrary, he taught they should take those infections with them into the body of their beloved art practice. With the infectious bacillus inside, the immune system of the beloved would be able to metabolize the new influences, adapting to them and coexisting with them in symbiotic union, thereby keeping the body of art alive in perpetuity. The kind of openness to exteriority advocated by Malevich is not in tune with our received understanding of the functionalist outlook of the Bauhaus. We tend to think of the Bauhaus as an institution that wanted to develop art practices as a means of influencing and controlling socio-technological developments. Thought about along those lines, the Bauhaus ambition was to adapt and refine art practice as a means of organizing and managing the production of the built environment. And it is this project of total design that we mean when we refer more generally to the notion of a modern movement in architecture. Malevich's theory of the additional element clearly demonstrates it is a mistake to promote UNOVIS as a kind of repressed Bauhaus. And yet, perhaps more importantly, after all, it was the Bauhaus who published his text. It also makes me suspect that the criticism can work the other way, and we should try to understand the Bauhaus and, indeed, the entire matter of modernism in architecture as a kind of subdued UNOVIS.